Welcome, everybody. 92 people, as you can see, not really close to 100, but I think people are dropping in as we start. It is Facilitating Change, Lecture 1. This is the online course for change agents, organizational change agents. I guess a lot of people would call this leadership, but I don't think leadership has a little bit of a traditional sound to it. So I think change agents is the new leadership of the few years. And there's almost 300 of you. At least you had somehow registered, some of you as tourists, some of you through FITEC, and some of you as Aalto students. Welcome all. And just like in previous years, I think the really interesting thing actually about this course is the fact that there's more non-students than students in this course. That is very amazing. And the ratio is something like that. So we have almost 2 professionals for each Aalto student. And that's really the gist of it. And looking at the feedback from past years, that's what people have really appreciated about this course. What is this course about? The objective, just to make clear we're all on the same page, is mostly to help you kind of change your thinking. How do you think about what is leadership? What kind of a leader you want to be? How does it fit into organizations? How do organizations and leadership are connected? And how do you help change in those contexts, especially the organizational change we mentioned in the beginning? But also we want to help you kind of realize, if you don't really, this might be obvious to you already, but how this is all very practical. That kind of change leadership and all these big words over there they can be extremely practical, and we're hoping that the exercises we give you every week will actually show you that these abstract things can become very practical with very simple exercises. We also added the word repetitive here, and kind of meaning that it's not like you do this once and you learn it once and then you're done with it. No, this is something we believe. This kind of leadership is something you keep doing over and over again, and I'll get back to that later. And the third one I'm going to get back to quite a lot is that this is very personal in a sense. It's not about having books and reading knowledge, but this is about really helping you reflect. How do you work? What is your take on this? How do you view the world? How do you change your own thinking, or if you don't change your own thinking? And to really help you calibrate kind of your expectations about this course, because you're very, very varied, heterogeneous group of people from different backgrounds, different countries. So I think it's super important for you to understand what you have signed up for, to put it that way. It's less like this. This is not, like I said, this is not like a book course. This is not a course where you read a book and then you learn something and that's it. And there's no exam. The way we, with Jari teach this, it's not like there's an exam that we have the right answers and then we have an exam to check out if you have the right answers as well. No, this is not that kind of a course. This is not that kind of a knowledge we're teaching here. It's more like this. It's more like playing a game, like a soccer game here in this picture. We're hoping that we provide you with tools and thinking that you kind of see the setup. It's like, we provide the playing field and the ball, and then it's like, okay, now it's up to you to go and play. This is what you do. We just give you the tools, we kind of give you the direction, and then you go and do it yourself. So this is not knowledge in the books. This is knowledge that you need to build and cultivate in your own head and experience. And the important part there as well is that you do this with others. This is very collaborative. This is very social. This course, the stuff we're teaching, the whole kind of perspective into leadership resonates throughout this course. And maybe to summarize it in a way, it's kind of this, put it in a yin-yang picture, that this is, you are in the center. You are the thing that, of course, you're the learner, but really you're not just a learning objective. You're the one that needs to reflect. And what we're trying to provide you is some practical things like the exercises every week and the discussions on these lectures, but also with the theoretical background. kind of saying that, okay, if you feel like this, if you think like this is actually, there are a lot of things and theories that support you in thinking like this, and so forth. So at the same time in this course, we're trying to help you think that what do you do actually? Doing actions, not just, reflecting, but also having the time to reflect how we think about things. How do we see change leadership and all that? So this course is very much about you. And this actually changes quite a lot of things about learning and quite a lot of things about teaching that I think you should be aware when we start this journey during these couple of weeks or 6 weeks. The next slide actually came up when I mentioned to Jari this afternoon that there was one of you said that you're coming here for again. You took the course 2 years ago, and you're back to have the course again, which I think is a great example that the kind of things we are doing our best to teach in this course. And because you are the centers of the course, everything I said about not being kind of book knowledge is the fact that, like the saying goes, you don't never step in the same river twice. The things we're trying to teach you, it's not that you learn them once and then you're done. No, you change yourself. It's like a river, and the things that change in leadership or facilitation are, you have different contexts. Maybe you do something now, and then after 5 years, you're in a very different context. So how do you take those tools we teach you and use them in a different context again? Maybe your role changes. Maybe you're a student now, but after a couple of years, you're a project manager. After 10 years, you're responsible for a business. And it's kind of like the principles, the tools, and the thinking probably doesn't change, but you change. And how do you take that into account? And that's what we really try to do in this course. The objective is that you, and we put in the center is the word facilitator. You could put there a leader or change agent, but it's really about what kind of tools, processes, ways of working, the practical stuff, of actually getting things done, but also the abstract stuff, the values, the attitudes, the meanings, all of the things that kind of work together, the theories and all of that. So we're trying to kind of build in the context of organizational change, that how do these two things work together? But you are in the middle, and you need to kind of take everything in and then make the most of it. And that's how we work every week. There's the lecture, and then you do an exercise where you kind of take everything we taught you, and then you kind of put it into practice in a very simple way. And one of the big things about this course is to actually are everybody else in this course. It's not necessarily the lectures. Lectures are kind of a starting point, but it's the other people in this course. And one of the key things we have learned in this course is to mix match you. Is that we take a random person and we make you into a pair and give you an exercise, and then you get to know each other. And then you see that, that person thought it like this, and that person has, problems like that. And it's really to leverage this exceptional crowd we have here, and which seems to be 120 as we talk. Mm. And about key thing about facilitation is that we're kind of forcing you to listen to other people. All of the exercises are about listening to your pair and kind of doing the exercise based on what your pair tells you. And we're going to be providing you with the materials and tools and thinking for all of this. And we know kind of already by now, we know from practice that all of the tools and everything we're doing, these are actually very useful already. You can start using them tomorrow in your work if you feel like it, and many people do. A few words about the lecture and the topics. This you probably saw in the welcome email and so forth. So we have 6 lectures, all of them online if you didn't catch that in the emails. And then a few words about the practicalities. So first, apologies for the mess that we have SISU and we have my courses and we have a medium and we have FITEC and all of that, but that's the world we live in. And we're trying to kind of help you navigate through that. But the thing is that we now have the Slack channel where you can see in the chat right now is the link. So that's the place to ask questions. We have the attendance form. So every lecture, if you're either a FITech or an Aalto student, you need to kind of record that you attended the lecture. And we're going to give you the link for the form. We're going to give you an opportunity to fix pairs that you can tell us that I would like to do all the exercises with this pair. But unfortunately, that's only for you professionals. For all Aalto students, we're not letting you pair up. I'm really sorry about that. Because based on the feedback, a lot of you students really appreciate the fact that you get to work with people you don't know who are from the professional work life. So, sorry students, you can't pair up. And then the place for all communications is Medium, because that's the place where everybody has access. SISU or my courses, not everybody on this course can access them, but Medium is a public platform, so you can access them. And that's where the recordings and the lecture slides are going to be. Exercises. So like I said, every week we're going to have exercises, pair exercises, starting today. And there's 5 of them all together. And like I said, we're going to assign a pair for you later today or tomorrow morning earliest. You're going to get an email where it says that you two are paired this week, and then you can take it from there. Those of you who are not Aalto students or FITech participants, you can obviously do the exercises on your own. If you really, really want to pair up with somebody, then just let us know in the email. And like I said, exercises are very simple, practical, really actually they're tools to facilitate. And that's why we need 2. You need somebody else to be able to facilitate. It's a social thing. And maybe there's a few things about those. The note there in the bottom is that the exercises are not like magical spells that you do this and magic happens. But actually the magic comes from the interaction. The tools are just tools for the interaction and the questions, just to make you sure. Attendance, need to mention this. So like I said, all Aalto students and FITechs, active participants, you must attend every lecture. There's only 6 of them. You can't really miss any one of them. However, there is the real world out there, which might force you to miss a lecture. Then just contact us over email. Yes. And then about these lectures, and I hope you got this in the email as well, the fact is that just as I'm talking now, you can actually do many things. And by now, after 2 years or more of the pandemic, I'm sure you know what works best for you as an online listener. But be ready once we have group exercises. We're going to have one soon. Be ready to participate. Have your microphone and the videos ready. And we're trying to give you a schedule for every lecture. So you actually know that, okay, I can now go and walk for 20 minutes and you'll be back by the microphone and the video. I'll leave this slide here for you to check out later if you have any problems or questions. But there's kind of recipe for success. If you miss a lecture, can't get contact to your pair, we're here to help. Especially Lee and Kiara are here to help. And today we're going to talk about the introduction. This is what I'm doing. Variety of motivations. That's actually when we're going to do the first breakout room of this course. And you're going to tell each other in the room why you are here, what are you looking for, what are your expectations. And then a little bit of lecturing. And then we have a break at 5. And then the last hour, we're going to do a little bit more lecturing and then the final exercise. Who are we here? So I didn't say in the beginning maybe, so my name is Risto, welcome. I'm a professor of practice here at Aalto University in charge of information networks. But before coming a full-time university professor, I worked many years, almost a decade as a consultant doing a lot of service design projects and design business, but lately actually the past 5 years more organizational change, facilitating change, and I've seen a lot of, I've been in part in over, let's say roughly about a dozen transformation programs in large Finnish companies and all that. So that's my background, and written a couple of books about change, leadership, and all of that in the past years. And then we have Jari. Jari, what do you want to say about yourself?
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the course. Great to have you here. So I have been around in these teams quite a while. I have also or at the moment, my position is as a lecturer here in Industrial Engineering and Management Department, and I could say that I'm an educator on leadership, self-management, and teamwork. But on my approach to be an educator is based on this kind of guidance-based thinking and practice. So I have been practicing all kind of facilitative roles. And in several different organizations. So, and I haven't worked all my life in academia. I have also practical experience as a change agent from industry, but mostly at the moment I'm working as an educator, and but having this kind of facilitative approach, and I have done all my research on that area as well, and. This time I'm teaching this course with Tristan. So thanks for asking me to join. So
pleasure to have you. This is the third time, I guess.
This is the
third time we do it together, but I think it's like the fifth time altogether. Yeah. And then we of course have the magic happening by our TAs, Kiara and Lee, which already emailed you, and I'm going to help you with all of the big, small, or medium-sized problems you might have. So either send an email or Slack, not LinkedIn anymore. So I think that's not used this year. But Slack and the email, as you probably know by this. Hey, who are you? We're going to do it so that we're going to give you, let's say, 8 minutes. If Kiara and Lee, you are ready with the breakout room. We're going to randomly put you together into small groups. And each of the small groups, introduce yourself. Give your name. Why are you in this course? What are you interested in? Maybe your expectations. Roughly 60 seconds each. But we're going to give you about, well, not 10 minutes, but I said 8. But there's not going to be hurry because there's more time than if you talk 60 seconds, but just get to know people. Who are they? Where do they come from? What are they interested in? And all of that. And then we will transport you back automatically here when you've done that. And like it says there, PS, if it's totally impossible for you to join a breakout room, then just don't join it. Just stay here on the main part. Okay, should we see how it goes?
Okay. Thanks for coming back, and hopefully you had a good first breakout room discussion and had some touch with others, why they are here and who they are. And now we are maybe having this kind of next 20 minutes, something like that, 15, 20 minutes, little lecturing part, which is maybe the most conceptual part of the whole course. So stay in tune. This is now something about our lenses, how we see our organizational reality, and why does it matter? Why should we be aware of our way of looking, way of interpreting, a way of making perceptions in organizational reality? And why this is called taking a step back is something that we take our lenses in our everyday life so granted that we don't notice them. We just take that, okay, my thinking is valid. And then what I just acquire knowledge and get understanding quite in a good way. But there's always possibilities to take another view as well. And so this is about lenses, and when we talk about ourselves as a change agents or facilitators, it's utmost important that we are interested of our own perspectives and also accepting that we have our blind spots as well. But when we talk about organizational reality, how do we encounter it? Or what all ways? So it's pretty much experiential stuff. So we meet people, we experience physical space, and then we perceive things, how people interact, what happens, and so on. We talk, we listen, so we communicate. That's one part of our encountering of organizational reality. We see views and pictures, we interpret those. And also, through these experiences, there's pretty much emotions involved. So it's also emotional experience. And then, most of all, it's very social. And then, through these encounters, ways of getting knowledge, we make interpretations and make sense. And what is important to acknowledge is that we all have unique lenses to interpret and make sense out of data we acquire. And that's something I want to pinpoint. Maybe this is for many of you quite self-evident, but I just always want to remind it that we sometimes, so we don't just take objective facts, because we interpret everything and make sense. So we try to digest that data. And this sense making or meaning making is I think it's very, very fundamental for us as humans. We want to make sense. We want to make meanings for things we experience. And then what's the apparatus we are having is to do that is our brain and maybe the bodily senses and so on. But we do this interpretation personally, and we can call that in a way we all have unique lenses. Of course, there's a lot of overlap in a way, but no two persons don't perceive the reality or actually interpret it exactly the same way. So there's always differences. And so why there are differences? So how our lenses are built. So it's through our life history, our growth history, through our experiences, and that makes them unique. So we have different worldviews and a view of reality. Some are more maybe trying to figure out that, okay, this is a fact-based world, like we here in academia think that it's we have a scientific process to get facts, and that's then one thing. But then there's other ways of seeing the reality as well. View of human nature. Some of us think that well, people are trustworthy. But some of those might be a bit doubtful. That, okay, I doubt a bit. Maybe I have to be a bit suspicious with people. Then personalities. So some are more optimistic, some pessimistic, or introverts, extroverts, or whatever personal differences there are. That might also kind of label our interpretation. Then we have different differing personal values and ideologies. That colors our lenses as well. Professional background and frames. Engineers, lawyers, business people tend to have, so our professional education and experience tend to give flavor how we see things, what's important, and how we interpret that. Then, of course, cultural differences, social experiences, backgrounds, in that sense, are very strongly giving us lenses to look the world. And then more, let's say, situational factors as well, social contexts might affect as well. And then even our personal vitality and alertness. When we are stressed or tired, we might be a bit short-sighted and have this kind of tunnel view. But then when we are more relaxed, more, let's say, resourceful, then we can have a more open lenses or richer lenses to look. And so I think this is something which I would like to say that is a fact about people, that we interpret and we have different concepts, different ways to interpret our social reality. But then I myself end up this situation every time that I forget it. So it's very easy to think that because I see it that way, all others see it that way as well. So are we prone to presume that others perceive and experience the world and situations similarly with us? So that's something which is very, very strongly taken for granted. And then if we take seriously that others perceive differently, would it be possible, would it be beneficial just to ask more? How do you see this? Or, okay, that's interesting way to see it. And not starting to argue that that's the wrong way, it can't be that. And so I think that's one important issue when we talk about facilitation and change, that there is different views coming together. And then we can create a process where the different views can be merged or discussed. But that's also one resource for us in a way that we can see differently. And okay, a man or a woman or both. That's the picture. But okay, if we don't have a concept or a theory in our mind, the data doesn't make sense to us. So that's one thing that our learning, if we don't have a concept of some future, then we don't even get the knowledge. But then it's also that we see the same things. Some of us have much more knowledge, much richer lenses to look a certain, or have a lot of experience through which the lenses have become richer, so we can interpret a certain situation, certain incidents in a richer way than some maybe more novice who has just little less experience. And I have been using one example that when we go now into springtime to woods or park or something, like what we hear is what we can call birds are singing. But when we for many of us, I think if we are not really enthusiasts in this area, so it's just a nice voice, which we recognize that birds are singing. But when really the professional go there, I think he or she can distinguish tens of different birds, really the differences. And so for him or her, that data acquiring, it makes much more sense. And I think it is all in our professional areas and so on, it's the same thing. And here the picture illustrates, maybe some can see here, black dots or patterns in a white background. But if you have a concept of dog or a concept of a Dalmatian dog, you can see something else that makes sense more. It's not just dots, but you can maybe distinguish here dog. And for some, this picture can, if you have a Dalmatian dog, then it can create a lot of kind of memories, emotions, and even such that it's much richer information or interpretation you can acquire. And it's the same thing in whatever field of world, field of life, that there is this kind of differences. And getting theories and concepts is important to make our lenses rich. But how about organizations? So what is our concept or theory of an organization or organizational reality? And would it be useful? What would be the useful ways to understand organizations? And here, maybe we can call them paradigms or lenses. And of course, we can take organization as something that we can scrutinize objectively and measure, analyze, understand it from outside in a way as such. And that's a lot of research is trying to do this. That's one way of looking organization. But then we can see organization more socially constructed, kind of context, and which are maintained through mutual meaning making within, and that's another way of looking organization. And now, when we are talking about change and facilitation, I would argue that maybe the latter is more useful way, but we can see it in both ways, or there are of course multiple other ways in between, as we can see. But what is our way of seeing the organization reality? What's mine? That's important scrutinize. And now some aspects of organizational reality which I want to raise. First is experientiality. So it's pretty much so that when we are within an organization, part of it, we are experiencing it, and that's one important issue. But also change. If we want to now through facilitation help the organization to change or improve, then it's strongly experiential process. And then when we get experiences, we try to make sense of what was happening, and normally when things are not going as we anticipated, then we start thinking that, especially. And then if we want to really think again, then we can call it reflection, that what was really the reason why this happened, and so on. And through this reflective talk, we can then end up that some learning can happen, that we make new meanings and maybe acquire new knowledge through this experience. And now, from change perspective, I would argue that it's interesting to see that maybe the change process is always, it's a matter of learning. And maybe the learning is something that we can call that we adapt to our different contexts and how we build relations and how we build new practices. So it's a matter of learning. But one thing, it's not just the factual knowledge. It's experientially produced knowledge through sense-making reflection, which leads to learning, and this repetition, which Risto mentioned already. And some other aspects which I want to pinpoint here is contextuality. So every organization is a unique context, and this kind of accepting that what's happening here, and how these people who are within creating the context is understanding, making sense, and so on. That's important. So it's not just bringing some analytic tools and telling people that this is your reality, but more how we can make sense together. And what's important in this contextuality, that each organization have a little bit different language and meanings. We have noticed this when we have changed jobs, go to other organizations, then we have to learn some new concepts or new language, new meanings. And context and our way of being in a context, it's being in relations, so that we are not single individuals separately communicating with each other, but there is a lot of stuff between us. And it's not just between people, but it's between people, systems, and physical space, and so on. And this relationality is something that binds us together, and that's when we are doing change. It's not just changing people; it's quite a bit changing relations, and changes in relations. And the third thing here is processuality, which is that organizations are in motion. So they are not in a way stable places in their everyday life. People are in motion. And if we take this kind of processual view, that there's a lot of things happening, and there can be kind of evolvement, but there can be also somehow decline as well. And then one thing about the organization is practices. So it means that we routinize things in organization. We learn things to have a certain kind of meetings, certain methods to use to do things, and then we learn those, and we can call these practices. And they start to be very strongly label our everyday work, that it happens through practices and relations. And then finally, all these is something that's connected as a culture. So the values, who we are, our identities, and so on. And so these are something which is socially built and routinized. And then when we talk about the change, it's something that we should accept, or I think it's valuable to think that way, that culture, practices, is something that has they have a recursive nature in a way. So it's when we go to a new organization, we are very willing to socialize ourselves, to learn how to think here and what's the right way to do things. And we also tend to teach new people what's the right way to do things. So and that way, the culture somehow start to label what's the right way to do it. It creates us. But then, in the same way, when we start acting according to culture, we maintain it. And it's kind of recursive process that we produce a culture every day through everyday interaction, meaning making, and then the culture tend to put us in certain positions and affect how we think and what's the right way to do things. And so this culture and practice tend to become deeply routinized and implicit, that we don't recognize all those aspects anymore. And that makes organizational change challenging, because the culture, I would like to believe that, or I believe in the science, Edgar Schein's cultural definition, in that sense, that it's very strongly connected to the very existence of the context or the organization. So that's why it's so, the violating into organizational beliefs is why we take it so, have a strong affections or emotions raised when somebody's violating our cultural beliefs, because it's connected to our belief what's the right way to exist. But that's just reminding you about the reality. But then some questioned if you take this seriously, that this is something the organizational reality is about, or what's the nature of it, and that we interpret things. So if we take serious the claim that our ways to see the world frame our agency and understanding. So I think it's very healthy, whatever we want to do as a professionals, and especially if we want to be leaders or facilitators or this kind of helpers, change makers, it's utmost important to be interested in reviewing our lenses, that we all have lenses, and what are our basic assumptions, that we take a critical view, that there's other ways to see, and how can we expand and enrich or make our ways seem richer, and how to be curious to other ways of thinking. And then our practice and cultural beliefs are strongly routinized and part of our identity. So then how can we let us to experience and explore and exercise and test new practices in a safe way? And this we can call this kind of kokeilukulttuuri in Finnish, that how to build embed this kind of trials and experiments as a part of our culture. And that's then one part of the change capability as well. And then finally, I would argue that we are more relational and interdependent beings than we believe, that we are not so individual and we don't have so much free will as we maybe anticipate or think. And that I think it's important to take issues of inclusion, participation, and need of competency much more seriously in general, but especially in a change situation, that these social connections and contextuality are strongly rooted in us. Okay, that was now this kind of conceptual part, but remembering that being aware, being curious about our lenses, and this course is now a very good opportunity for you to think why you think in a way, why you perceive things in a certain way, what are your expectations, what are your kind of first thoughts, and could there be a second thought? And when having a facilitation discussion, it's quite pretty much put aside your own thinking and just be curious how others are thinking and helping them to think in a maybe in a new way. And that's why Lindsay's understanding own and accepting that others are different is crucial for facilitator. Okay, thank you on my behalf. Do we have an hour break?
Yes, we have. Do you have the break slide already?
Yes, I do have.
Let's have 5 minutes and we continue 8 minutes past. Time to move on to the second theme of this lecture. So if the first one was what just Jari talked about, was really about the lenses and being aware of the lenses that we use, but at least to me, it's always a good reminder of what are the lenses I don't use. And for that, I actually need other people. I need to do what Jari, you said, is to listen that, okay, how do you see that? I have this minus 1.5 in my lenses. What do you have in your lenses and so forth? The other theme is this big word we all are familiar, and it's like any big words. They are great. Oops, I almost forgot to turn on my recording again. Fortunately, I'm just the backup. It's like any big words. They're really good because they really capture a lot of things in them. But it's like any big word. They're so big that you can't really make sense of it. But it's pretty much this. This is the setup. If we think about change and leadership and facilitation, typically the context you are in is that the organization is in the middle of some kind of an uncertainty. And typically the classical digitalization uncertainties are something like this. It's that we need really fast time to market and innovation work, and customer expectations are changing, and new enabling technologies are coming, and legacy structures and so forth and so forth. And then at the same time, many different things are changing as well. We're getting new technologies and we're getting new business models, new markets, new regulation. And there's so many things going on that we don't even have time to figure out whether, let's say, blockchain is relevant for us as individuals, professionals, organizations, as businesses. And this is just adding more and more fog into seeing that what the future looks like. Where are we going? Where are we driving? If we're changing, where are we going? And of course, if you weren't convinced about the fog, thanks to digitalization, I think by now everybody understands that big things can happen on this planet that cause even more uncertainties. And a lot of businesses and leadership is all about navigating through these type of uncertainties that the COVID pandemic has brought us. Although it's even, at least many of us feel that it's already post-COVID time we live in. But we're still dealing with all of this change and reactions into that, especially how organizations are doing. And of course, the big question is that we need to move on. We need to move forward as an organization, as individuals, as businesses. How do I lead into the fog? And what does this look like in organizations? And this has been, of course, a problem even before the war in Ukraine, even before the pandemic. Like I said, the globalization, yes, and the digitalization have already kind of produced a lot of fogs even before these two big things happened. Let's go over a couple of them, and I'm sure you are all familiar with these, and I'm not saying that this is the truth, but it's kind of like bringing us all on the same page. What are the kind of things that are causing the fog when it comes to leadership, when it comes to organizations and change? And this was one of them I had there, and this picture probably speaks volumes. And I remember many years ago, there was an older board member I was talking with, and he said to me that, Risto, many of the board members who are in the big corporate boards and doing a lot of big decisions got their management principles maybe in the 1980s. So their kind of principles of management are quite old. Maybe they have changed them, obviously they have, but still their kind of background is from there. And one of the big things about traditional management principles is that if you kind of put it bluntly, a lot of traditional business management has been managing organizations to create predictability. That we can predict what are the numbers next month, what are the numbers in the next quarter, giving to shareholders and all those reports about what is going to happen. So you kind of manage the whole organization to give you those predictable numbers. Of course, some of them are wrong, but it's all about predictability. And if we take a long time span, like 100 years, the predictability has been relatively okay. There hasn't been so much fog as there is now. Of course, there has been in history a lot of fog suddenly and things have changed. And we have actually learned from that. But the big thing about the management principles is this, that if you think about any organization that is relatively old, 30, 50, 100 years old, the whole organization has been designed and managed to kind of be predictable. That is kind of like underlying carving into the stone. So this is IBM from the 1930s, the typical hierarchical organization where you kind of divide things into functions and underfunctions and underfunctions. And we kind of manage it from top down, and everything is kind of producing those numbers and predictability upwards. The second thing I mentioned is the new technologies. But so many things are coming up that, the bigger the organization, the more difficulties it has to reacting. Is this relevant? And once figure out if this is relevant, what should we do about it? So it's not just that what should we do about it, it's first to realize which of all these changes actually matter for us. And once you kind of figure out things, then things have changed as well. And then it's as simple as this. This is the problem. And we all know about this, and we all talk about this. It is the technological change, but not just technologies. It's the business models that come with it and everything. And this has, of course, produced this kind of desire and need for speed. We should be really fast in innovation. Because innovation is typically, that's the forefront of an organization. If you think of an organization that it's moving forward, like Jari said, what is right there in the front? It's the new, it's the development, it's the research, it's the innovation activities. That's where change happens. So it's kind of natural that if you try to build an organization that drives into the fog, that's where you drive first. You do innovations, new products, new services, new business models, and all that. And that is actually a response to the uncertainties. But of course, that's very difficult. And those of you professionals who have worked and seen this, it probably looks something like this. It's a whack-a-mole game. If you come up with something new, and maybe you come up with a prototype, you put it into the market, and blop, there's another change coming up, and you suddenly need to go there. And of course, this is the world where things like agility and responsiveness and lean and all come from. How do you make an organization that is really good at whack-a-mole game? And again, whether we like it or not, it's the pandemic has shown us how this works in practice. How some companies have reacted really fast when things changed, when the lockdowns came, when some of the business models didn't work anymore. Whether it's schooling children, whether it's delivery of groceries and all of that. Those organizations were really fast in their innovation, really fast in changing in the uncertainty. Another thing that often comes up is legacy structures, that these are maybe slowing down, or these are things that we need to address in the uncertainty. It's not just that like we are running alone into the fog, but we might have like 10,000 people and a lot of other structures with us. And what is slowing down? The bigger you are, the more probably there are legacy structures. And typically there's something like this. We often talk about legacy IT systems, that the IT systems are not helping us to do things we would like to. This is of course obvious for anybody working at the university. The legacy systems are not necessarily helping us, but actually slowing us down. But it can be other things. It can be thinking, it can be management structures, it can be physical assets. Imagine a railway company that has all those steel rails there. That's a physical asset that needs to be taken care of. And not all of them are bad. Some of them are really important. For example, let's say that you have 10,000 people working in your organization and you should take care of them. I think that's a good thing, but that's probably slowing you down in some other places as well. So it becomes kind of things to take into account. You cannot just become a quick startup like this, even though it looks like many corporations in the past decade would have liked to. And then, of course, we have the customers. It's not like the customers are stable, but they are changing as well. If you think about the organization you work for, that needs to change. If you think about yourself, that you probably want to change, you want to grow and learn. And then you have probably in any business or even non-business, you have some customers. And their expectations change. So there's a lot of things going on. And just like in this image, in the left-hand side, maybe you go to work, maybe that's what your travel report system looks like, or what is hour management system where you punch in your hours. And at the same time, you look at the outside world and it's looking very different. You have like Amazon grocery stores where you just walk in, take stuff and walk out. So there's like this amazing contrast. And whatever you're doing, your customers live on this planet where they have examples like that Amazon. Or if I added this university or life example, is that here on the left-hand side, our university here at Aalto, we have to deal with this kind of a legacy IT system that honestly is not very good. And at the same time, we have like mobile services like Volt here that we could just have food delivered into our house in 30 or 40 minutes. Imagine the contrast of how difficult it is to get into this course, for example, because of all the systems, but how easy it is to get a warm meal. And that's how our expectations are so very much higher because things are happening elsewhere. So to kind of sum it up for this course, and the kind of one of the starting points for this course is this fog. How do I lead into the fog because I cannot see what is there? That's another way of talking about how to do leadership in uncertainty. Because typically you would imagine if I want to lead people there, I should probably know what is there. I need to tell my people that, yeah, that's where we're going. But so many things nowadays and the past years have caused that, no, I don't really know what's going to happen in 1 year. So how do we lead? How do you organize? What do we do, generally speaking? Are we going to be paralyzed into the fog? Yeah, probably not. Well, good news. Is this all new under the sun? Is this the very first time in human history that there's so much fog that we don't know what to do as organizations or group of people or businesses? No, of course it isn't. Like I kind of hinted a little bit earlier, there has been crises on this planet before, and we've had organizations to deal with uncertainty as well. And actually there's like a whole literature of how to handle strategic uncertainty. It's actually quite well known and quite studied. But somehow, well, now I'm in the university, so I've kind of seen that, I have colleagues who study this. We have people who do research, and they know that these things have happened before, and they build on top of that. But then on the other hand, kind of my other half is in the business world, where we're so much thinking about, oh, this is all new and never has happened before, and nobody has time to go back and read books. So we kind of forget and we believe that this is the very first time we have ever faced uncertainty before. But of course we haven't. And this is a theme that I'm going to come back, and we're going to come back in this course as well. And actually many of the exercises we do are based on very basic things about how do you start analyzing and being calm about change and uncertainty. But before we go to the exercise this week, kind of going back to that, what has happened, and again, kind of summarizing, at least from this, how should I say, Western European perspective, what has happened, especially in the business world, that reacting to the fog, to the uncertainty. And two things I want to bring up. And I call these corporate awakenings. And these things started happening even before the COVID, but the pandemic has, of course, accelerated these quite a lot. So, if you had people saying that we should do this to tackle uncertainty, A lot of people started listening to those people once the pandemic hit and the uncertainty was obvious for practically any kind of business on the planet. Oh, somebody's asking. Yes, the lecture notes and the slides will be available on the Medium. Remember, everything's going to be there. So don't worry. Awakening number 1. And Jari mentioned and talked about culture, which is another big word and a vague word, but still I think it's really good to kind of bring and keep there. And this is really a buzzword. This is in fashion nowadays if you talk about organizations and organization design and workplaces and businesses, everybody is talking about. So they have kind of, I would say corporations and businesses have awakened to the fact that, hey, it's our own culture we need to change to be able to deal with the uncertainty. And culture, again, is a big word, means a lot of things, but it's very handy to use. But trying to kind of give an idea what it most probably means in a business and company culture context. Because there is the old culture that a lot of businesses and a lot of organizations are trying to get away from. And it maybe looks something like this. That maybe you have a top-down control. Remember the IBM from the 30s. You have processes that have been there for maybe hundreds of years. Imagine, how do you produce energy if you burn coal? You burn the coal and then it heats up the turbine and then it produces energy. Or how do you produce, journalism? How do you do articles in newspapers? That was pretty stable process for, I would say, almost 100 years. And of course, all of this produces very rigid structures. And the bigger the company is, that, okay, here's our marketing. It is over here in this city, and in a totally different city, we have like our R&D department. And though, they become literally very rigid structures, brick walls and distances of 100 kilometers. And chain of command. And strong silos out of this. And it kind of makes sense if you think like an energy company that is, producing electricity and heat by burning coal, is that because the company, the organization lives longer than human beings. Some energy companies here in Finland and elsewhere, they're more than 100 years old. So, they're older than the people working there. So it kind of, the organization has to be rigid, has to be strong silos, because people come and go, but the way we do things remains the same. And if you spot here a little ghost of Taylorism, I think it's always good to mention 100 years ago, this was the way to think about management. This was the business management principles. But you kind of take a scientific approach. How do you manage organizations and businesses? And we can still feel that in many organizations. And I'm sure some of you kind of hear the ghost of Taylor wherever you're working. And kind of 3 bullet points from there, what Mr. Taylor said over 100 years ago. We can model the organization. That, unlike what Jari said, Mr. Taylor believed that we should model it. And here's the organization. And then the leader is kind of a rational observer. The leader is not the organization. The leader is somebody who steps aside and looks at the organization. This has actually a lot of consequences. And then the third one is that we can kind of build it and run it like a machine. That it's, once we model it, and then the leader is the operator who just puts oil there and little, tightens the bolt there, and it just goes up and running. And then we get organizations like this. The IBM. And here on the right-hand side, I just put kind of what other thing was very kind of about thinking in the 19th century was that, the whole world, the biological world we live in, can be modeled as well into tree structures and hierarchies. So there was kind of this very kind of scientific kind of thinking that we are smart human beings and we can model the whole world. That is kind of already we can hear and maybe feel somehow in the organization thinking of today. And really to hammer in the point, kind of bringing it into language of today, that I think we often still see that organization is some kind of a scientific machine. If you're a student, think about the university. If you're a professional, think about the organization you work for. And we all know this hierarchy, and that's of course the traditional taxonomy of functions. We all know this bureaucracy. And what is bureaucracy? It's all about encoding causalities and rules in the nature. Top-down control, we still have a lot of bosses and top-down control. Well, that's kind of the thinking that the leader is the rational observer. It's based on that. And then the whole idea that management, organizations is like a natural science. It's like biology, it's like physics, it's almost like mathematics, it's like engineering. And that's assuming that we just need to find the correct theory about our workplace, our culture, our organization. And once we find it, it all makes sense. But kind of what Jari was already saying, that no, it's not. We have different lenses, and it's, you can look at it as a process, you can look at it as a relations, you can look at it as a social construct. No, there's no single theory about the place you work in. There's no single theory about the organization you are in. And that makes things a little bit tough. And maybe just to those of you, I noticed from the notes, some of you somebody said that you're familiar with agile software development and all of that. And just as a note here, kind of a side note, we think the whole agile manifesto of doing agile software is new. Well, it is new when you compare it to Taylor, but it's actually kind of a totally anti-Taylor thing. It is so Tayloristic because it's doing everything opposing to Taylor. So even this thing, Agile Software Development Manifesto, is still kind of very much bound into the 100-year-old Taylorism. So that's the old world. And the new world. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. The new kind of working culture, new kind of innovation culture that we're aiming for or dreaming about maybe. You can call it agile, responsive, lean culture. Couple of characteristics. First of all, it's that the grassroots, they take responsibility. The people doing things, the people in the customer interface, let's give them the responsibility because they are in the forefront of the fog. They can see what's happening. And not just responsibility, they can make decisions. And for them to make better decisions, they need transparent information. So we need to kind of open up the information in the organization. And we cannot be too bureaucratic about the processes. We cannot go and tell people that this is the way to do, but rather we focus on the end result. We give them, this is the desired impact. And you, grassroots people, you know the best way to get there. We need to give them the end result, but we're not going to be there telling them how to get there. And then last but not least, especially now after all the remote working we've been doing, I'm sure everybody here realizes for this kind of a culture to work, you need to have people actually feeling well. They need to be happy. They need to be creative. You need to be focused on the people and what they do. That was awakening number one, that the new culture looks something like this. And now the other awakening is that we cannot, as leaders or changers, we cannot just tell people to change or give them nice PowerPoint saying that this is the new kind of culture, let's go there. And this is probably very familiar to many of you as well, because this goes all the way back to 1970s and Japanese car manufacturing. That's of course where the lean thinking comes from. That's where they had already in those working cultures, the idea know the best. In this situation, the people working on the factory floor know the best how to make that assembly process better. And things like Kanban and Kaizen and all of these Japanese words, of course, come from 1970s and the car manufacturing culture of Toyota and other Japanese manufacturers. And actually the story goes, the one that I'm going to pick here is about John Shook, who was an American working for one of the car manufacturers. I think he was working for General Motors. And they sent Mr. Shook to Japan to study how do they actually do these things, because the Japanese were producing cars that were better quality and less expensive. That's a tough competition. And what Mr. Shook learned was this chart. That is actually his thinking. That this is already in the 1980s, that the old model of how do you change an organization or how do you change a culture, the old model is that you start by defining that this is the culture we want, then you tell that these are the values and the attitudes, and then you tell people what to do. Kind of top down, definitely. But what he learned from the Japanese way of thinking, from the lean thinking and the car manufacturing thinking, is no, we actually start from what people do. We start from the grassroots and we change things there. And once people start doing things differently, like hands-on doing, acting differently, behaving differently, then certain values and attitudes emerge. And once those values and attitudes emerge, we get a company culture. So changing it from what we do kind of brings up the new culture. And this brings us back to the uncertainty and the way that we think about uncertainty nowadays. Is that, okay, if you're driving into the fog, you can't plan it because you can't see it. So you may need to build some kind of a responsive company culture so that when the company drives into the fog, you can trust that people know what to do. Then, of course, culture, what does it mean? Such a vague word. Well, culture of doing. That's actually, if you listen to people and keynotes about all this, what they're talking about is a culture of doing, of behavior, of action. And this brings us to John Shook. What is this doing? It's really, if you want to change what people do, change the routines, change the tools. And what are the routines and tools we have seen in the business world in the past 5 to 10 years? Well, I would say 10 to 15 years. It's all of these things, the lean startup thinking, design thinking, agile methods, the good old lean methods. Maybe some of you have had a 6 Sigma lean training. Those are routines and tools. Those are all things that change the way you do things. And I'm sure many of you students have had some kind of a design training. Think about how much that is about the tools and how those tools imply certain thinking. And that's, of course, the world we live in. That's why we have so many of these tools. We have the business model canvas, which is probably the most famous. We also have the lean canvas, and many of you are probably familiar with some kind of agile methods like Scrum and so forth, and how much they're focused on routines and processes and tools. And behind them is actually the fact that once you introduce these tools and routines, people's thinking starts to change. And that's kind of the Trojan horse, if you will, of these tools. That these tools are there to help people rethink things in the change. So to kind of sum it up, it is really about like this, that if you're the business leader, if you're the big boss, of course you are, and you have to deal with uncertainty, your first reaction is, okay, I need to build a responsive culture. So what culture? It's a culture of doing. So if it's about doing, then it's about routines, tools, and practices. So what do I do? And that's why we have so many of those weeklies and canvases and retrospectives and, whatever, Kanbans and workshops. They are kind of the medicine. They are like those vitamin pills that you're taking. Those are the vitamin pills you are given wherever you're working. So that once everybody starts kind of doing these things and having these routines, what starts happening is that suddenly the actions and the behavior change. All of these canvases are very tangible. You can say, what is this corporate, what is this change happening? Well, we have the business model canvas. That's a tangible thing. And once a lot of people start behaving the same way, you start having things like shared thinking, shared values, shared meanings. Let's say, for example, what does agile mean for us? Well, imagine having 1 year of people using the same tools. You actually have a shared meaning what it means for us in an organization. And once you have those shared meanings and collective experiences, ta-da! the belief is that you have suddenly an autonomous, responsive, shared culture. And that is believed to give you the competitive advantage when you're driving into the fog. So to put it bluntly, fog, a lot of canvases. If you have ever wondered why the business model canvas became so popular, all I'm saying is that because there's a lot of things beneath it, that it's a tool to change a whole organization culture. You probably didn't start using it like that. You probably didn't realize, you thought that, hey, this is actually a practical tool about thinking a business model or having a workshop or, introducing new thoughts. But actually what it's doing, it is changing the whole company culture gradually over time. That was it. That was the uncertainty part. That was the fog part. And believe me, we're going to get back to those canvases. We're going to get back to those tools in the future lectures. And we're going to and like I said many times, that tools, the simple tools we're going to give you as weekly exercises are going to be make you think differently, make you have this experience of, wow, okay, I thought differently and it felt like this. So the tool is there. It's like I wouldn't say it's like a drug that gives you hallucinations, but that's the only thing I came up with. It's like, let yourself have this experience of thinking like this, and then coming back to it and go like, wow, at least for a second, I looked at it from a different lens. And it's really where Jari's point today about the lenses and the complexity of an organization, and the whole setup of my talk about the fog and the uncertainty. That's the field, that's the game. And we're now pushing you into that game to play the game and see how it feels together with others. Let's see, a couple of questions there. Not sure I have time to answer before I introduce the first homework.
So the Katarina has had raised her hand quite a while ago. So.
Oh, I don't see those, so my apologies. Okay, Katarina, if you have a question, you're happy to be recorded, then go ahead.
Yes, I can address these questions. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, loud background on my here. So I wanted to ask you about the strategies for managing uncertainty and crisis management, because you showed a couple of examples. As for example, what we learned from COVID pandemic, and now we have this crisis because of the war in Ukraine. And I'm particularly doing the research in extreme context now, in the context of Ukrainian war. So, and I'm interested to learn more about the tools, practices, and change management perspective on crisis management. Could you address those or share your experiences, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Katarina, for asking. Crisis management? No, not as such. That's not really here. But change management, yes, very much. And dealing with uncertainty and going back to some of those basic lessons learned about change management. I think there's quite a difference about crisis management, especially when you bring up such thing as a war. But I think some of the basic fundamentals of change management are the same nevertheless. And the things I think we're going to talk about next week or further is going to go back into that. How do you analytically take the uncertainty and start analytically putting into smaller pieces and addressing those pieces one at a time. It's not really rocket science. It's really actually quite simple. And I'm hoping maybe the tool I'm going to introduce is the beginning of it. So let me go to the tools, and I will eventually look at the questions you had and try to answer them next week, the latest. But the tools and the exercises we're going to give you, the 5 of them, they're building on top of each other. And after every week, we're going to go back and see what you did and comment in the beginning of the lecture that, okay, what actually happened? What did you do? We're going to sample some of your results and the things you returned. And the first exercise is what we call the context onion. And onion in a sense, like just like those Russian dolls over there, that, you know, just like an onion, it has many layers, smaller layers inside and inside and inside. And this exercise is all about asking and drawing and understanding the bigger picture. And let me introduce it and give you a quick example about it. So very similar to what I had just before, it's really that you are probably, whatever you do, you are here in the center. You're thinking, what does our team do? What do we do? What's our goals and actions and all that behavior? But kind of the things to understand what do you do and why do you do, you need to go outside. You need to take the kind of the second layer of the onion. What's the way of working? How are we organized in a bigger picture? What's our company or organization all about? Why do we exist? What about the outside world? What's our role as an organization in the outside world? So working in uncertainty is very much about understanding the context and having a shared meaning. What's the context we live in? If everything has changed or many things have changed, let's redraw the context we are in so we better understand what should we do. And another way of saying it is whatever you're doing, there's always a larger context. Nobody is an island. And this is of course true if you're in organization more than one person. You can look at it like this. There's the individual, you, the person working. You're probably part of a team. Your team is part of a larger organization, and that's probably part of a larger company, and so forth and so forth. And another way of thinking is that, how do you know that you have been successful for whatever you do? And that's, of course, defined outside your layer. Your individual work is more or less defined by the team. Your team can tell you whether your job was well done. Then the team is kind of the success is defined in the bigger organization, which is part of the bigger organization, which in a business context is typically part of the market. So here's what I mean, a quick example of how you can use the tool once you start understanding the context. So let's take a design example, because that's a lot of my background. Let's say that you are a UX designer, and you're a big fan of design thinking, and you want to learn more. And then you have a facilitator, or actually, in this example, you are the facilitator. And you tell them, okay, I'll coach you, I'll teach you all the tools and everything to become a really good UX designer. But then what happens that after the designer has learned all of these, goes like, it's so frustrating. I know all these tools and all this thinking, but nobody in my team understands them. Okay, let's go there to the next step. Can you coach the team? Yeah, I can coach the whole team, and then everybody understands what are the benefits of design thinking. Then the whole team learns, but then you go like, the team is doing fantastic work, but now our boss doesn't get it. Our corporate governance model doesn't support our design way of doing. And all the initiatives are dead. Can you please teach and coach all the teams and directors? So the next layer of the onion. Okay, let's do that. So you go and coach different teams and directors and PMOs and so forth and so forth. And then you're like, oh man, everybody in the company understands this, but then there's the whole strategy and the board of directors. They don't understand this kind of new thinking. I'm sure you get the point by now. But every success is defined from the bigger picture. And if you want to be successful, you need to understand those layers. And it's like this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to change an organization, and that's what this course is all about, you need to go together. Can't go alone. And maybe that's why you are here. You want to facilitate change in other people. You most probably know everything we're going to be teaching here, but maybe you don't know, how do I make the other people, how do I make large organizations change, and how there are different levels of it. And if you think your role as a facilitator, there are different levels of it as well. They're different, put into this onion. Maybe if you're the big boss of the company, maybe you're a change leader. Maybe if you're kind of just helping one individual, then maybe you're mentoring that individual. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle. You're like a coach or a facilitator that is coaching whole teams or even whole departments and so forth. And of course, those have developed with different tastes into change and organizational change and how it's done. But this kind of point is that you start seeing the differences once you start drawing those organizations and understanding the larger context. It's this ancient saying, almost ancient saying, that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want a hole in the wall. People don't want you to be a designer. They want the impact that design does. People don't necessarily want a responsive organization. They want the impact that a responsive organization can create. And once you start understanding the context, in the fog, understanding the lenses, looking at it broadly, magic starts happening. You can make success criteria visible. That's actually one exercise coming up. You can make your part of a larger whole. You engage others, you start engaging people, understanding them, all of that. And suddenly, if everything goes nice, once you understand the bigger context, your work becomes strategic, you're more motivated, more meaningful, and your work becomes about impact and change, not just doing the little smallest part of the onion. So that's the background. Here's the exercise. So you're going to get a pair. So if you're an Aalto student or a FITEC participant, you're going to get a pair. And you get your pair, and your job for this exercise is to listen to them. Ask them, what is your current project? And they choose one. What is the organization? And then you start drawing the onion. So this is you here. So that's the team, that's the project, that's the organization it's part of, and that's the whole company. Okay, and what's the biggest now? And you start drawing the onion. And of course, drawing this is all about asking questions from the other person, making sure you understand what they're telling. If you don't, you ask more questions, you ask for clarifications, and then you draw the onion. It's a simplification. And then you switch. Then the other person does it for you. Okay? And after you have done both of those onions, spend 10 minutes, I would say, reflecting that, what did you learn? Did you experience something different? Did you get a different lens? How was it? Because what you're doing is that you're actually facilitating when you're drawing those pictures. You're facilitating the other person to see things differently. And the way we return this, and there's going to be instructions probably here in the Zoom chat, but in the Slack, and probably in the Medium as well. So we're going to put up a Google form again, where you can submit your exercises by the end of next Tuesday. So next Wednesday, we can go over and look at them and bring them into the lecture as well. And you get the link and you get your pair in the email. And I added this slide from last year. You don't have to go through this, but once you start doing the exercise, have a look at this slide. The fact is that, of course, this is a simplification. That's the whole point of in the whole complexity of the other person's world, you're helping them to simplify things into this onion. And actually, the process you're doing is you're helping the other person to focus and to prioritize. We're going to get back to that next week. That's it. Don't leave yet, though. A couple of slides added here. More reading. There's a blog post there I wrote with some colleagues many years ago. But actually, then a few academic articles about organization, culture, and change, and all that. And especially for you students who might be thinking about, master's thesis on these topics and so forth. But also for all you professionals to have a look at those, that maybe for inspirations, or maybe to have, something more heavy to talk with your colleagues about. And here's your checklist before you go. Make sure you mark your name in the attendance form. For those of you who are not doing the exercises, it doesn't matter. You just come and go as you want. But all Aalto students, all FITEC students do that. We're going to put the recordings and the slides into Medium tomorrow. And then Leah and Chiara will send you the email, like I said. And then if you have any questions, there's the email, there's the Slack, or you can just hang around and ask now. But I am done, and I will stop the recording now. There we go. Couple of questions. Ani has, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you very much for very, very interesting lecture. It was very, for me, it was very interesting, actually. Like I could follow it from the very beginning till the end. So I really appreciate for this, like for both of you. My question is, like you were talking about this onion, which is very, very informative as well. But how about if the smaller teams, like or middle, like the smaller teams start their changes, but then the big boss who is sitting there is very oblivious to changes and is more of having this mindset that, but we have been doing this way for a long time and it has been always working. Why do you, like, hey, a small person working somewhere in a small team, why do you want to change this? Like it has been working for, I don't know, centuries or whatever, like 5 years, 6 years, 10 years or something like that. And I'm the boss and I'm the managing boss. Why do you want to change it? So how to go through this?
Quite a question, but I'm happy you brought it up. Well, the obvious first thing is that you do the onion, because one of the things that the onion exercise probably helps you with is to understand, like I said, the bigger context. So in this sense, what you want to do is to understand what the world looks like from the big boss. What does the big boss see? What kind of lenses does that boss have? And once you understand the other person, then maybe your own message becomes a little bit more convincing. At least you're speaking their language. You're understanding what are their goals. You're understanding what is their success criteria. And it all begins by start drawing what is the hierarchy and all of that. What is the onion all about? The actual question you ask is, of course, a very big question. But let's start with the onion this week. And then next week we move forward.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, like this is a topic that has been in my mind for quite a long time, how to convince, like when you are not in a decision-making position, like in that level decision-making position, how to actually not convince, but like to make them understand that the change that, like a smaller team has to do, it's actually going to be for the benefit for the company, because usually like the management usually think about money. Their vision, like at some point it turns into money, so money management. And like how to actually make them, like see a little bit the same way, the same goal, that it's about money, but it's gonna be better for the whole company and organization and for the money. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a classical question you're asking. But let's get back to that for the rest of the